Hi, I'm Brad, and I took a shower before making this video. You might be thinking that after 2 years of doing constant data mines of every SteamVR beta, I would get tired of doing it. You're wrong. It's always fun to lift up the curtain and see what's behind, or what's going on. We just had a big beta update to SteamVR 1.27 beta. And yeah, it took me a while. It took me and a couple other people a while to get everything together, and organizing this was hell. But yes, I don't know what I'm going to call this video, but for this PowerPoint, I'm calling it SteamVR 1.27 Overlay All the Things. It's about overlays. Disclaimer, while everything I'm going to show you are real strings and everything that we've gotten from the actual beta itself, every time I say this, interpretations of what these strings mean are always speculation, with my best example why I think it might be meaning to this feature or upcoming feature or upcoming fix, all that good stuff. I say this every video. Now we're going to start with the front end, which is not actually that interesting. I didn't even want to bother to grab the 1.27 patch notes because they're all mostly just bug fixes. However, if you are a Linux user, you might be having issues with this beta. In fact, things might just not work. SteamVR might not start up correctly. And yeah, they changed what is known as the startup file, which pretty much is required to get the Linux version of SteamVR to boot up correctly. It looks for a bunch of different environments, different settings, and they completely refactored that file. And this file now references these other files, these shell files that actually don't exist for anyone except Valve, their internal version of SteamVR on Linux. So yeah, there are ways to fix it, but I wouldn't even bother because even if you do get this fix, you can't even get the dashboard open or anything else. So just revert out of beta for now. The more ironic thing is after they pushed this big breaking update for Linux on SteamVR, they published a brand new help article on Steam of what you should do to get SteamVR working on Linux. And they give you some suggestions, like if you're on Arch Linux, you should definitely be using Wayland, more specifically the Plasma Wayland compositor, which that's not too surprising. A lot of their stuff that Valve uses is Wayland. They use Plasma themselves. They don't use Wayland Plasma currently for the actual desktop mode for the Steam Deck. They're still on X11, but people expect that they'll eventually switch to Wayland for that as well, as these features on Wayland just get better. Now, they do say that X11 and everything else related to Linux is still supported, but yeah, a lot of focus on making sure people use KDE Plasma, even especially for Ubuntu, which is apparently a lot of people on Ubuntu are having issues with Linux. So now we're going to talk about the backend, which are always the more exciting stuff. But before I do, I really want to mention that this whole video, this whole PowerPoint you're seeing, all this data mining was probably the roughest one I've ever done so far in this data mining SteamVR history thing. There were so many different systems and changes, and it was awful to be able to organize it to get into this small, neat presentation. So I really appreciate people. A quick shout out. These people here, these are my mega patrons on Patreon, and stuff like this literally just couldn't happen without your kind support. So if you want to support me to do more of these videos, bradsmells.com/Patreon. Okay. Now we're going to start right away with some more fleshing out features related to eye tracking. A lot of strings related to an eye tracking server executable and everything else related to allowing Valve's next HMD to actually use eye tracking. They started to flesh out those systems even more. In fact, they have a new debug option, which is a eye tracking visualization. I imagine that is more related to being able to see where the person's looking on a screen for debug purposes. I wish they didn't call it eye tracking viz, which you can see we actually got somewhat of a menu working. Obviously, nothing really works. We don't have the eye tracking server executable. But yeah, I wish they didn't call it eye tracking viz because that sounds very similar to a different system that Valve likes to use for their Source 2 engine. But that's related to visibility and having stuff disappear when you're not looking at it. So yeah, it's probably just, again, like a little dot or something so people know what you're looking at when you're debugging the eye tracking. Interestingly enough, they also talk about using the eye gaze from the eye tracking to emulate a joystick X and Y value, and even a click, which I don't know how you're going to be able to do the click. I don't know if they're turning blinking into clicks. I hope not, because I never liked that situation. But they are doing some weird translations between eye tracking and inputs already in Steam VR. And yes, there is blinking. There is blinking for the actual eye tracking. However, they seem to be focusing on a Boolean, so it's on or off at the moment. But we'll talk more about this later on in the video, because this is still very relevant to even more systems going on in the back end. Now, one of the big changes that, again, is also in the back end, even though it doesn't look like it when I show you this picture here, is they changed the location and really a bunch of stuff about the theater mode that I've been talking about for almost a year now. Again, just a quick recap, a theater mode, they're getting rid of the old one that would open up in its own sort of application, Unity app that is terrible. It's basically deprecated, no one should use it. And they've been switching it to use the dashboard and overlay system. So you would open up an app and press the button, and then it would just pop up. And there's also some stuff going on with real-time reflections, from what I understand, related to what's being shown on that theater screen. Now, before, it used to be on the dashboard. So you constantly had to have the dashboard running just to get the theater mode experience, which was okay, but the new change makes a lot more sense, where they're now moving it to an individual overlay bar. So every overlay can have the choice to be put into its own theater mode instance. For example, if you open up this desktop view like I have here, you can click the theater mode. It would make the room dark depending on that setting of darkness you have set. And yeah, it could be for any 2D screen, basically. However, they did break the theater mode. I can't get it working anymore because they refactored it a ton. So that sucks. But yeah, they're definitely working on theater mode, and it'll make more sense why very soon here. I made a video very recently about how I believe Valve has been fleshing out Gamescope, which is their Steam Deck 2D game compositor, and how they've been wanting to use it as something to be able to play 2D games and overlays for Steam VR. And we got it working. It worked pretty well. There were some issues there, but we got to do stuff like play flat games in VR as an overlay, and even get stuff such as entire desktop environments like KDE Plasma running its own instance in an overlay as well. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with Gamescope. Again, it's purely so you can actually get games and everything to correctly match up to the refresh rate of HMD, apply stuff like FSR, all these benefits of doing that at a low latency. And this is like the first SteamVR update that I'm aware of that they actually reference Gamescope directly in the files. Now, strangely enough, even though I've pretty much been publishing this stuff for a while, Valve did try to obfuscate the actual Gamescope references in the files. We can pretty much get rid of those obfuscations pretty easily these days. But yeah, Gamescope is definitely an important feature upcoming to Valve's next things in SteamVR. Now, going back to 2D windows, which we're going to talk about a lot because there is a lot of stuff here about 2D windows. They started adding a lot of systems related to 2D video capturing. Now, it would be like a normal quad window, like maybe 16 by 9 or whatever you set the width or height to, depending on the app chooses. And it would just record that and capture that sort of thing as its own instance, right? What's cool is you can take that video capture feed, and they're implementing a new screen sharing feature directly in the Steam VR and the overlay system in general. You can see the new icons that they added the files, the resource files within the last update. It looks very similar to the big picture mode icons on the top bar, which, by the way, I don't think I talked about this, but they also changed the VR HMD icon to start Steam VR in the actual Steam client window. Doesn't look like any HMD that I'm aware of, but that's a neat little thing that Valve did like a couple months ago. But yeah, you can stream what looks to be 2D screens or a 2D view of whatever you're doing or looking at across some sort of local connection, which might be, again, to replace like the VR view, which currently is how people record gameplay on Steam VR and share it and stream it and all that stuff. Not only that, they're expanding this sort of screen sharing feature into a social feature, which is really wild. So in my previous big data mine 1.26, I talked about there was this incognito mode, and they're kind of renaming that functionality to what they call a group mode. These icons are from the 1.26 beta. They were brand new. and they basically allow you to toggle between whether or not you want to share whatever you're screen sharing to a group, or keep yourselves just private, local screen sharing and recording for whatever reasons. And that leads us to probably one of the biggest features that they've been really fleshing out a ton in these past couple updates. In 1.26, I kind of showed some first references to what Valve is calling a Steam VR voice chat. I'm probably going to be calling it a Steam VR chat because it just sounds better off the tongue. And the plan was they seemingly were going to also implement it on the desktop mode of Steam, where you could see a whole different menu of different VR chats that are going on for people that are using this feature on your friends list. So very integrated to Steam itself. But they, again, have been fleshing out this feature like crazy. And going back to that video sharing, there's about 108 different references added to this sort of Steam VR chat thing, where you'll be able to take these 2D videos and share it among your friends in a group chat. Somehow Steam will use these overlays to like decide where these things will pop up for other users, how big they'll be, how they need to be moved and rotated, and spawning location. It's a lot of stuff, and it kind of overwhelmed me looking at just this one subset of the new Steam VR chat feature that's being worked on. But there's even more subsets that I had to data mine and go through. And the next one, keep an eye on these. Keep an eye on these because they're also important. But the next one is spatial audio. Yes, this Steam VR chat has full spatial audio support. If you don't know, Valve has really good audio. They're very good with their Steam audio system. It sounds very amazing. I remember the first time I got the Valve Index, one of the things that blown me away was a friend in a multiplayer game for VR came up to me and whispered in my ear, and it freaked me out because it sounded like they were in the room, right? Well, they're bringing spatial audio. They have all this thing set up for that, for this Steam VR chat feature. Very standard, but very good to have. But this next one right here, this is the big one that makes my brain go, what is going on? What is Valve cooking here? So they're not only taking spatial audio, they're not only taking 2D video they can share amongst your friends, they're also sending over the network, the Steam network, networked poses. Poses are basically all the different ways that your head is looking, moving, which area it's in, where your controllers are, your hands are, and also your eye tracked pose. They'll be able to send over where you're looking, your gaze data, what your eyes are doing, if you're blinking or not. It's doing all of that over the Steam VR chat, which runs in an overlay. This might be confusing because it sounds like Steam VR Home, right? But this is very different from Steam VR Home. Steam VR Home runs in an actual Source 2 instance. It's like its own game with its own sort of server system. This is primarily running, or I should say not primarily, it is only running in the overlay system, the dashboard. So when you pop it up, you'll only have access to these features over every other app that you're running at the same time. And there was this new button that appeared in the Valve internal menu for the Steam VR settings. Now in the menu, they are calling it toggle mirror device rendering, but everywhere else that I saw related to strings, they call it a mirror overlay. And when you click this button, it only works when you actually are in the dashboard, of course, and it works for any app that you're in the dashboard. It shows a very simple mirror, just like in VR chat. Valve are apparently mirror dwellers now, of your actual poses of your head, where you're looking, and your controllers. Looks exactly like the most default options for Steam VR Home. But again, this is nothing to do with Steam VR. It's not Steam VR Home. It's not running in Steam VR Home. It's running on top of everything. Basically, the compositor of over any game that you want. Going back to the 2D streaming functions, they also have a new overlay being referenced in the files called the Steam Link OpenVR overlay. OpenVR, again, is just another name for Steam VR. And Steam Link, for you don't know, is the actual application that allows you to stream stuff like your Steam Deck, or maybe things on your computer, to other devices, other things that are logged into your Steam account. They sold a little Steam Link box years ago, and it was just basically a simple Android box that you could stream games to your TV in your living room. But more recently, it's heavily used for like streaming your games to your phone and doing some games directly on your smartphone. Well, they're making a whole overlay just for the Steam Link feature. Again, a ton of 2D video gaming content stuff being put into the dashboard and overlay system. I kind of did an experiment not too long ago related to this where I was actually streaming my Steam Deck directly to my other computer index, and I had some cool AR pass-through going on as well to show, hey, this is my screen. And while I could have done a bigger screen or a theater view, I did that so I can actually see what buttons I was looking at for my hands, because I'm not a controller user normally, so it was nice to have that. It feels very similar to that concept I did, but maybe more fleshed out and way more polished than what I did, hopefully. Now, remember I said to remember these little strings about where these video feeds respond, whether they can be rotated and translated, and these remote spawn locations, which I couldn't figure out exactly what these remote values are for. I couldn't figure out if they were for screens or for something else. But I wanted to bring them up because there's this one feature I'm really hoping that this is all for. Now, this is a dream feature. I can't connect all the dots to say this will happen, but something I really want, and I've wanted for a while because, I spend a lot of time in VR chat, right, with friends, and I always want to do things in VR chat that maybe are not even connected to VR chat itself, something that I can just do on my computer and share it with friends. Well, Steam has a feature called Remote Play Together that is a really cool feature to allow you to basically have one user have one game in their library, and if it's a local cooperative or local split screen game, you can use the Remote Play and Steam Link features to stream it to your friends, and they can join with their controllers and basically remotely play with each other. It's a great feature, and I always wanted that for VR, because you can literally bring couch cooperative into basically what is the new world, right? No one actually does couch co-op anymore. Everyone's playing online. But if you can have actual real-time avatars on a couch together playing a remote play game with awesome reflections off of a theater screen, a theater mode, whether it be on top of any game or even just the basic Steam VR, that would be a really good feature. And I really hope a lot of this is kind of going toward that. And if it doesn't go toward that, another cool thing about if this did work is the way overlay system works in SteamVR right now is it doesn't matter if it's a VR app. It also works for AR too. It's persistence between either thing. So you can literally switch between a VR app, AR app constantly, and the overlays will stick there. So this feature would be able to transition to that as well if that is what they're doing. Now, there's one problem, though, with overlays that I think Valve really needs to get right, and I hope they are. So a focus on overlays is great. I think overlays are probably the most powerful tool that SteamVR has that hasn't even been tapped into fully for a lot of reasons. But one of the biggest reasons is Valve never implemented something called shared depth buffers. This is something that actually the original Oculus Dash had back in like 2017, 2016 kind of era. And the way it would work is you would be able to do stuff like have your actual dashboard or your overlay and have it connect with the depth buffer being streamed or pushed from the actual VR experience you're doing. So instead of having like a far away overlay that you can see in the distance, but it's still overlaying over everything that's close, you would actually have objects that like you can tell the depth perception. Some objects in the game would appear over or in front of your actual 2D overlay, and vice versa. Things such as your hands in VR would be able to also be in front of these 2D screens. That's something, again, that really needs to be implemented by Valve if they want to focus on these cool 2D screen features and overlay stuff. And I'm not sure yet, but it seems like they're doing this. Now, this is. I really hope this is what a lot of stuff is. I asked a friend who recently did download the SteamVR 1.27.1 beta, and they were making a game. And they realized the new beta was actually crashing their game, and when they were debugging it further, they figured out it was actually the depth buffer stuff that was screwing up their game from SteamVR. So SteamVR all of a sudden with the new beta was actually trying to process some of the stuff related to depth buffer and the texture buffer and everything going on there. And yeah, we didn't really figure out why they were doing it. So we started looking further, and we noticed that the OpenVR SDK 1.26.7 launched the same day as the new beta did, and they had these new debuggers sort of statistics for the compositor, the VR compositor, and they talk about stuff such as how much frames are sent from a application with def, and there were some other strings going on with the SteamVR beta update related to def and stencil buffers and stuff. So I'm really hopeful. I'm really hopeful that is what's going on, because if this happens, then finally SteamVR overlays will be totally worth developing for everyone, because it'll just be such a useful feature and can be persistent across any application. And theoretically, it could be persistent as well with AR, because if you have something like a depth sensor on like a camera depth sensor or whatever on a headset, kind of creates a depth buffer of your real life environment. So that's how you would apply overlays to mixed reality. You would need the depth buffer either sent from games or the depth buffer generated from the real life world from like a depth sensor or some depth generation from a dual camera setup. So yeah, long-winded thing, but I think it's really important, and I want to strike home that Valve, I hope to God you're finally working on this, because it's so important for what everything else you're doing right now. One more thing, again, related to all this, if they do include a depth buffer from applications, they would also be able to improve their reprojection technology. And in Prism, which is a system we still cannot activate, and they still constantly update it, and it's basically a big refactor of things, they do have a lot of updates and changes to their reprojection system that still requires stuff like depth images and depth frames and everything like that. So again, that's another reason, if you don't care about the overlay stuff, better reprojection would be another reason why you would beg Valve in the comments right now to implement a shared depth buffer, even if app devs would have to support it, but got to start somewhere. Some other things from the SDK while they were, I was kind of briefly talking about it. Allow Steam overlays was a feature that I talked about in my last big data mine. Basically allows Steam to literally create and destroy any overlay it wants on the fly. I say the word overlays a lot, and it's going to probably continue forever as long as I'm data mining Steam VR. Ironically, they took out the actual functionality for me to be able to enable Steam overlays. It's still there in the files, but they turned it off. I can't turn it back on anymore, which sucks. I'm curious if I would have been able to get something cool activated, because I don't see why else they would remove it unless while also flushing everything out related to it, unless, hey, I might have been able to peer too far into the curtain or something. A couple other things that added to the SDK were some button reservations. In the last big data mine as well, there were 2 new button inputs that could be sent to OpenVR, and that was the Steam button and the quick access menu button, which is the same buttons, those big round capsule buttons on the bottom left and bottom right of the Steam Deck. It's very likely that whatever controller that Valve does next is going to copy that config and have those buttons as well. It's already in the OpenVR SDK, even though it's not saying what it is, but I know what it is. Another thing from the previous data mine was all about more porting of the Steam Deck, they call it the Gamepad UI. They're bringing it over to Steam VR, and they're calling it the VR Gamepad UI. And yeah, there's been more updates. Again, more stuff related to porting that over to Steam VR. It's probably going to be the brand new UI for something like Steam VR 2.0 or whatever they decide to call it. And the interesting thing is they will apparently pop up as their own panels. Some of the things about it, it's probably not going to be exactly just one boring 2D screen. From what I understand from data mining this, they'll have their own panels, which makes it a little more interesting. But yeah, there's also a new controller icon. It's a very small icon, so I'm guessing that's eventually also going to pop up maybe a different Gamepad UI for actually playing 2D games. We'll see. Not too much there, just more fleshing out. Another thing they keep stripping out and replacing and changing is the Steam VR keyboard, which is still god-awful. Worse than it's ever been, probably, I would even say, almost. Yeah, they've been working on new keyboards for a while, but this is probably one of the bigger, probably the biggest amount of strings related to changing the keyboard I've seen so far. Interestingly enough, it seems like the applications for SteamVR will be able to kind of request different versions or small iterations of the new keyboard, such as a small one, one with arrow keys, one that's larger, one that has a done key or doesn't, all that good stuff. But yeah, keyboards. It will eventually get replaced. We just gotta wait forever, I guess. Another thing that's been updated from my last data mine was the room setup button or functionality, which is brand new. It's a brand new type of room setup that would happen in headset, and they renamed it to Immersive Room Setup. Now, again, we know this is for Deckard because it uses the driver _HMD strings, and that's pretty much everything related to Deckard uses that. They have a fancy new icon here, as you can see. It's like, I don't know what to say about it. A little stick guy with he's like has a jump rope under him or something. But yeah, it's getting fleshed out a little bit more and changed, and we'll see what happens. What makes it so immersive whenever they announce Deckard and show that stuff off. And these are just more strings, again, related to how the eye tracking is also related to Deckard and how this screen makes my face all yellow. Now, two more tiny things. I'm calling them unclearisms because while I would like to know what they are, and there's small hints to kind of explain what they are, these are like the most speculative things probably of this whole video. The standalone system layer, I wanted to bring it up because a lot of strings that you might have seen throughout this video referred to a system layer. And I want to talk about the standalone system layer a little bit because this is a function you can turn on for SteamVR, and it does something. What it actually does is it kills pretty much every process or kills every functionality related to the dashboard, all that good stuff, overlays, and even that dark zone that you might be in if you have SteamVR Home turned off in SteamVR, where it's like kind of a grid and you see some mountains and stuff. Turns that all off and only shows stuff in your headset when you have a game running. That's it. It seems to be purely focused on only showing the standalone, like an actual game, and that's it. So it makes me wonder, when I see all this communication and mailbox strings related to a system layer, and I see the way that standalone system layer is, I wonder if they're planning to have all the actual dashboard and overlay and all that good stuff running on the actual mobile chip on the front of the HMD for Deckard, and they want to have so that split processing of having only the game application, the VR game application running in parallel with the dashboard running on a different chip, because that would be pretty cool if they did something like that, and it would make sense of why it works this way currently. Now, this is the final unclearism, and I like to think I know what it is, but it's its own thing. We'll leave it like that. It's its own thing, and it seems to be related to SteamVR being able to generate on the fly a tile floor. It's literally called that, tile floor. And these tiles have a lot of their own statistics, such as reflections and all this other stuff. And while I would like to think that it's probably for the room setup and like stuff related to marking out your floor when you're doing that room setup, I wasn't able to fully connect it to that. So tile floor, don't know what it is, has reflections, might be for something related to theater mode maybe, or the other stuff related to remote play together VR or whatever. I don't know, but it's interesting, and I had to include it here, even though I have no freaking idea what it is. But yeah, Valve time is at play. I will not guess when this HMD will be announced. However, and this is where the copium really kicks in, right? One reason this data mine was so difficult to do was because I couldn't believe how many strings were added and so many things I had to organize together into different files. This was probably one of the biggest back-end changes to SteamVR I've ever seen in my 2 years of doing this. So one thing I feel for sure is if you don't know the way Valve works, they can choose on whatever project they want. But usually for like big projects they're trying to get closer to the finish line, they'll bring a lot more people over. And I can't help but feel that they have a lot of people working on SteamVR right now, more than there's ever been in the last probably 4 years. So otherwise, I don't think this update would be as big as it is with all these different systems, all this stuff related to networking. Like networking, that requires its own specialties, right? And there's a ton of networking stuff. There's a ton of stuff related to just the Steam client. There's a ton of stuff related to eye tracking and getting that. It's a huge effort that Valve is doing right now, and I really feel that when I did this data mine. So yeah, they're probably circling this channel like sharks right now, trying to see if I say things right, which I might not be. But yeah, keep up the work, Valve, and it's been fun data mining this madness. Anyway, that's everything I had to say. Again, if you want to support me, bradsmells.com/Patreon. Like this video. I need to sleep. Bye. Bye.